Very interesting, John. Right after Vatican II, for example, we had the hippie movement that started. When? 67, 68?
You're not going to tie the hippie movement in with Roman Catholicism, are you?
Vatican II called for cooperation with the non-Christian religions. You have the Beatles singing what kind of songs? My Sweet Lord. And who is that? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Introducing Hare Krishna to the young people.
They even say that at the end.
Yes, to the young people. And then they sing about Let It Be, Mother Mary, where she comes to me in times of trouble,
you know that when
speaking words of wisdom, let it be.
When I was going to school at La Sierra, that just to show how far back this apostasy goes, they were singing Let It Be in the Sabbath school at Loma Linda.
And that is a song about Mary. So you have Mary, you have Hare Krishna, all being brought into the youth. There was an enormous youth upheaval right after Vatican II. At the same time the charismatic movement was being introduced and exploding in the Roman Catholic Church all over Europe. I traveled in Europe at that very time, about 66, 67 with my family, and all over Europe you have these hippies that are into spiritualism. You have hundreds of hippies coming from America. We traveled a few years later in Nepal, and we heard them tell us there of how hundreds and thousands of American youth, as a result of the hippie movement, came over to Nepal looking for Shangri-La, and the Nepalese people authorities had to put them by the hundreds on trains and ship them down to ports in India to be shipped back to America. But why was there a big upheaval? In Germany, just before Hitler took control, a few years before, you have the phenomenon called the Wandervogel.
The what?
Wandervogel.
Wandervogel.
Yes, it was when there was a hippie movement in Germany, and you had these children of middle-class families walking all over Germany, drifting all over, into nature and all of these things, just like the hippie movement. Those young people then were formed into the Free Corps, they were called, to do battle in the streets against the communists, and they eventually became the hardcore of the German military for the Nazi movement.
And it's the hippies of the 60s that are becoming the hardcore leadership of our nation and our church
and they're
right now.
Promoting New Age and all of this.
Bob,
and you see, it happened right after Vatican II.
And this happened in Germany before World War II, before Nazism?
This is exactly. And those hippies there became the avant-garde of the Nazi SS and the German military machine.
You yourself in Jesuit Agenda 1 said to me, just as you said, I knew that when my generation came into power in this nation and in this church, that we were in for a
enormous upheaval.
Enormous upheaval. And this was all been repeated from what happened in Germany.
You see, what do the Jesuits want to do? They know that if they can get the youth, if they can get the oncoming generation and create an upheaval so that they break up all their ties to other things and they get reoriented to certain causes, they are a mighty force to be used. And we see 50 years ago this phenomenon of the hippie movement in Germany. We see the collectivism that came in. Today we have the hippie movement right after Vatican II. We see this massive worldwide collectivism. See, Nazism was like a trial run, and it had both strains of Roman Catholic natural law at its foundation. We still want to get, of course, into the systematic analysis of it. But here, let me read to you a little more from page 17 here about collectivism. The individual has reality only as part of the group and value insofar as he serves it. On his own, he has no political rights. Incidentally, I was just reading a few months ago the book on constitutional law written by Lawrence Tribe, one of the foremost liberal constitutional law scholars in the nation from Harvard. And he said that the First Amendment right, that's the right of free exercise of religion and non-establishment of religion, the First Amendment rights now, according to law, are available to the individual only through the group to which he belongs. And when I read that, I thought, aha, only available through the group or the church to which he belongs? And I preached this. I told about this in a sermon, and a woman came up to me afterward, and she said, Bob, I've been through it. I know what you're talking about. She said, I came into a conflict because of my personal convictions with the situation in my local church. The issue went to a court of law. And an analysis was made of the church's position in contradistinction to my individual conscience. And I lost the case because I was not part of that group, you see. And now we have a phenomenon where the faithful are being disfellowshipped and disenfranchised, if that principle continues to hold true, that Lawrence Tribe mentioned, disenfranchised from protection of being a member of a church, you see, in the face of the law.
You know, with the Supreme Court now, the majority being Roman Catholics, believing in natural law, and isn't that all we heard in the Clarence Thomas thing of natural law, that it's going to come right down, trickle down, right down from the Supreme Court across our nation and throughout our church.
Right.
That's not difficult to see.
That's right. You see, this, and let me tell you this, John. From my study of Jesuit writings, one of the major concerns of the Jesuit order is to change people's worldviews. And that's what we're looking at here. To change people's worldview, for instance, in America, from individual rights and the supremacy of individual rights, and we'll look in a detailed, systematic way shortly, to the idea that the community is the all-important thing and the individual must be sacrificed to the community.
Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1992. That is what is happening in our denomination. Have you ever, did you ever believe it would be possible in such a short time to have the global worldview of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination change as much as it has in the last year or two?
And it's accelerating.
Unbelievable. It's frightening.
Yes. On his own, he has no political rights. He is to be sacrificed for the group whenever it or its representative, the state, deems this desirable. Fascism, said one of its leading spokesmen, Alfredo Rocco, stresses the necessity for which the older doctrines make little allowance of sacrifice, even up to the total immolation, that's the destruction, of individuals in behalf of society. So that's very interesting. And here we come here to the celebration, a gathering of community spirit. And listen to the wonderful way in which it's presented. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, children played in neighborhood streets. Sounds of young laughter echoed through open kitchen windows in preparation of the gathering of the family dinner. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, there was a sense of family. But I ask you, John, why was there a sense of family?
Because of Christ.
Because of
Christian
Christ.
home.
Because of Protestantism.
Protestantism, exactly.
And let me quickly grab something here so we don't lose it in our train of thought. This book,
we've used that before.
by John Courtney Murray. I just want to emphasize once again, top Jesuit, John Courtney Murray. We hold these truths, Catholic Reflections on the American Proposition. He lays out in here the massive shift in America from the old Protestant values of the Bible being supreme, of submission to the Bible, of acceptance of the Bible and acting on the Bible, and having self-sacrificing love as your motive, and the supremacy of subjective rights, and how that has all been destroyed in public life now through relativism and situationalism, and that is preparing the way for Roman Catholic natural law.
Bob, I hate to keep harping on this, but this is exactly what we're seeing in the church. Nothing that is decreed, nothing that is done when people are disfellowshipped is anything said about the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. Everything is the church manual, the church manual, the church manual, the church manual. Any time that somebody is disciplined or disfellowshipped, they always is on page such and such of the church manual. Why have we gotten away from this, that everything is in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy? We don't use that in the Seventh-day Adventist Church anymore for the foundation of why we do things. It's now, what does the church manual say? I see this exactly happening in the church.
And what does the community of faith, quote-unquote, say? You see,
Yes.
that is a good Jesuit term, the community of faith.
What does the, quote, church say? What does the General Conference say? What does the church manual say? Instead of what we used to, what does the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy say? It's what does the community of faith? What does the General Conference? What does the church manual say?
John, here's the next one. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, teachers were recognized as revered leaders. They guided the innocent with wisdom and courage, empowered by an innate love of children. Sounds wonderful. But John, if you travel to Varanasi in India, and I've been there, the Mecca of India, of Hinduism, the degradation is unbelievable. You don't see a city of light there. You see a city of unbelievable darkness. We came in our bus, and here there was right outside our bus a dog with an enormous ulcer on his mouth. I have a picture of him. The degradation, the filth, and the stench of the city was unbelievable. This is Hinduism. This has been tried for centuries, John. The Bhagavad Gita has been around for about longer than the complete Bible, thousands of years. And Hinduism has been tried to the ultimate, and the verdict of history is that it produces unbelievable degradation, pornography, evil, and the caste system, all of these things. And now Hinduism is coming in as an angel of light to the Western society and has been largely promulgated through rock music to the young people
Absolutely.
Of the nation.
That was our era that did that through the Beatles. Were very influential in that, Bob.
And here, once upon a time, not so very long ago, happy moments seemed more plentiful as we reveled in the carefree merriment of the good life. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, there was a sense of prosperity. That prosperity was due, Ellen White says, to the two horns on that beast, the lamb-like beast of Revelation 13, republicanism and Protestantism, civil liberty and religious liberty. The dynamo of Protestantism produced this prosperity, and it is from the wealth of the Protestant nations that the Vatican is largely being financed today, because the Roman Catholic nations don't have any wealth hardly to produce because of their degradation. What we are looking at, John, is all of these dimensions of spiritualism and Roman Catholicism that the verdict of history has declared to be utterly and completely bankrupt, now coming into the Protestant world, selling itself to the Protestant world as being the answer to the problem which they themselves created in the Protestant world. It's an amazing development. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, the sun laid down to rest beside us in recognition of another honest day's work gone by. There's the work ethic. Soothing breezes. Do you know that in the time of Luther there were 150 feast days out of every year? Almost one day out of every two was a feast day where they didn't work, and nothing got done. The work ethic came from the Puritans. And now the New Age comes in as if they have the answer to an honest day's work. You go over to India and you see those, long-haired gurus sitting in the lotus position by the canals, just meditating in a state of nirvana all day long. They aren't working.
Tell me something. Do you see the American labor unions playing a part in this crumbling of the American work ethic?
I think so, John. I think
Absolutely.
we see that. Sure.
Ellen White says that in the last days that the labor unions would be foremost in causing anarchy in our country, and that's why she tells us to stay out, because you see the American work ethic has been lost because of the labor unions.
Yes, yes. A gathering of community service. Please participate in the birth of this creation. That's in Orlando here, by joining us at the celebration. A gathering of community spirit. So this gives us another dimension to celebration. It is this collectivism, which is identical to what was in Hitler's Germany, where the individual finds his perception of reality and his sense of worth in the community.
Bob, our flagship station for Prophecy Countdown, I'm on one of the major television stations here in Orlando, primetime Sunday morning. How should I address this? I mean, since Orlando, since the city that we are in, that Prophecy Countdown's headquarters is just on the outside of, is going to be the first city of light, how could I address this on television here to enlighten the people of Orlando of what is behind all this?
Well, that you know, John, that hit me when I was studying this. I said, here we have prophecy countdown, this dynamo of energy, preaching the truth, and the Lord has put it right here in juxtaposition to the city that is destined to be the prototype New Age city for the nation with 1,000 points of light.
Maybe God has placed us here for such a time as this, Bob.
Oh, certainly has. Once upon a time, today and always, there will be a people made of magic, as if blessed with a power all their own. What does the gospel say? The power comes from Christ, you see. These are the quiet souls. These are the gentle souls. These are the souls who right the wrongs of the world every day in every corner of our community. Their secret rests not in wealth nor in the trappings of the times, but in the power they have discovered in the gift of giving. I found when I studied Buddhism, Buddhism even believes in self-sacrificing love. But it can't produce it because there has to be a new birth.
That's right. That only comes from Christ Jesus.
That only comes from Christ. Their presence radiates an illumination of spirit in the form of a light, creating a glow in the community that, if multiplied, would be felt across the country. So you see, this is a massive sell job to get the people involved in New Age. And you see, New Age, as we discussed last time, is an arm of the Roman Catholic movement. All of these things are coming together, being pulled together at this hour in Earth's history.
Yet there is a false system of self-sacrificing that we find in Buddhism. Do you remember during
That's
the Vietnam...
what I mean. Yes.
Do you remember during the Vietnam War that Pulitzer Prize-winning photo of the Buddhist priest that went out in the street and poured gasoline over himself and lit the torch?
Right.
That is a photograph that is just... You can never get it out of your mind. That man was willing to douse himself with gasoline and be torched for the peace movement, and we find people who are in this false system of self-sacrificing. So there is something that looks very pious and very holy and maybe even very Christian and very righteous, but it is demonic.
Yes, that's so true, John. And listen to the religions now with reference to Earth Day. This is from the Associated Press. They quote from Psalms 24, "The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof." With observance of Earth Day this week and an ecumenical Ecology Sunday this weekend, churches are planning strong representation at the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, June 1 through 12, which involves governmental delegates and thousands of others from around the world. An ecumenically backed environmental Sabbath was set June 7 to call attention to the international efforts to safeguard nature. Now, in Freedom's Ring, in our June issue of Freedom's Ring, we looked at the call by a Jesuit professor for a Sabbath to be held to promote unity around the world, and that everyone was to begin this Sabbath on Friday evening. And it was to go all through the Sabbath and lead into the Sunday celebration of Christ the King. And everyone was to pray that the spirit of division would be exorcised from the world. You see how all of this ties together? And here now, this very thing is coming to pass through an environmental Sabbath, being set June 7 to call attention to the international efforts to safeguard nature. Churches have drawn together about this, says the Reverend Ken Grant of the Presbyterian Church USA, based in Louisville, Kentucky. We woke up. We've been sobered to learn of the harm being done to the environment. Virtually every major religious body or their leaders, Protestant, Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Jewish, have joined the effort in the last few years with a growing crescendo of concern. The web of life is one, U.S. Roman Catholic bishop said last November, adding that the task of sustaining human life itself cannot be separated from the care and defense of all creation. Most major Protestant denominations, the Episcopal Church, United Methodist Church, American Baptist churches, and the United Church of Christ, among others, have adopted calls to safeguard nature. Judaism plunged strongly into the movement in an unusually inclusive meeting in mid-March of leaders of all four wings of that faith, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and Reconstructionist. Quote, "For Jews, the environmental crisis is a religious challenge," the group said. Quote, "As heirs to a tradition of stewardship that goes back to Genesis and that teaches us to be partners in the ongoing work of creation, we cannot accept the escalating destruction of our environment. it is our sacred duty as Jews to take action. So you see how this is a marshaling cause to draw all the churches, all the world religions in, all the nations in, and all the individuals to develop a spirit of collectivism and to promote the agenda for a one world government. I want to get back here now, John, to the encyclical. Many interesting things yet here.
Now, this encyclical letter that Pope John Paul II wrote shows how that all the things that we are seeing recently in the environmental movement was propagated by him years before this started taking place, and it's all starting to fit together, Bob, why all these things are happening. We had no idea that all of this fit together in some type of Jesuit agenda. It's unbelievable.
John, I'm reading here from page 74. It is above all a question of interdependence. Now, we have whole organizations, such as a Trilateral Commission, which are dedicated to producing financial interdependence among the nations between Japan and Europe, particularly Germany, and the United States, sensed as a system determining relationships in the contemporary world. So it is above all a question of interdependence. The Pope is interested in bringing about this interdependence sensed as a system determining relationships in the contemporary world in its economic, as we just discussed, like the Trilateral Commission, cultural, political, and religious elements. Notice the comprehensiveness of it, and accepted as a moral category. When interdependence becomes recognized in this way, the correlative response is a moral and social attitude, as a virtue is solidarity. So, notice
we learned in the last video that solidarity is a Catholic term for labor unions.
Yes, for their activity in labor unions. It's much larger, like celebration. Celebration is not just liturgical change, but as the Ecumenidzine document in the World Council of Churches points out, it is first of all for liturgical change, but second of all to bring all of human life under the control of the church to be regulated according to the time. Now, as we look at this issue of celebration, now we see is not only a Roman Catholic liturgical term, it is a comprehensive term that New Age uses.
Embraced by the New Age.
And that is being used now to express the bringing together of the world community in this worldview of collectivism, which was present in Nazi Germany.
So the word celebration is first and foremost a Roman Catholic term.
Yes.
It is then a New Age term,
yes,
and then it is a General Conference term.
Well, that too. That's right. We have accepted it from them. When interdependence becomes recognized in this way, the correlative response as a moral and social attitude. Notice how the Pope is interested in developing moral attitudes and social attitudes as a virtue is solidarity. So just as solidarity was the term for the labor union movement, Rome's labor union movement, her showcase of how to bring communism down, her showcase of a labor union based on the theological premises and teachings of Thomas Aquinas. According to Malachi Martin, this solidarity has a much larger scope to it than just Solidarity Labor Union in Poland. As we pointed out last time, it is the word being used for the labor unions in America. But it is not only a word being used for labor unions, it is also a word being used to describe the interdependence of the entire global community, because these labor unions are the spear points of accomplishing this, along with the activity of Rome through celebration. So we are looking at a very comprehensive plan. This, then, is not a feeling of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortunes of so many people, both near and far. On the contrary, it is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. That is to say, to the good of all and of each individual, because we are all really responsible for all. This determination is based on the solid conviction that what is hindering full development is that desire for profit and that thirst for power already mentioned. See, the Jesuit concept, according to Courtney Murray here, is that the whole American Constitution, with its system of checks and balances, rests upon the thirst for power, you see. So they try to castigate the Constitution that way. And in actuality, a large aspect of the checks and balances aspect of our Constitution came from Sir Isaac Newton's discovery of what happens in the atom and what happens in nature with the protons and neutrons, you know, negative and positive fields and all that, keeping everything in balance. And our checks and balances were designed to prevent the thirst for power, to prevent the totalitarian control of one of the triad aspects of our government, executive, legislative, or judicial, to keep each one from ultimately becoming a totalitarian entity that would enslave the nation. So it was for the protection and defense against power rather than a manifestation of a system of government based on power. So that's all very interesting too. These attitudes and structures of sin are only conquered presupposing the help of divine grace by a diametrically opposed attitude, a commitment to the good of one's neighbor with the readiness in the gospel sense to lose oneself for the sake of the other instead of exploiting him. The exercise of solidarity within each society is valid when its members recognize one another as persons. Interdependence must be transformed into solidarity based upon the principle that the goods of creation are meant for all. Now this starts a very interesting concept here. This is page 76. Surmounting every type of imperialism and determination to preserve their own hegemony, the stronger, and remember Malachi Martin said one of the great goals of John Paul II was to destroy the nation system of politics and to create an international system of a one world order. Now, John, look at what's happened in Europe.
Oh.
Look at what Gorbachev has accomplished. And Malachi Martin tells us he doesn't think, in a recent interview in April of this year, he doesn't think Gorbachev is finished.
No way.
He says, if anything, Yeltsin is short-term, and
That's
Gorbachev
right.
may be installed as the head of this European economic community that is going to be the power base for the post-New
I have
World Order.
always thought that. Don't count Gorby out by any means.
Just recently, Gorbachev came to Germany, and the people were just shouting in ecstatic speech, Gorby, Gorby, Gorby. So, surmounting every type of imperialism and determination to preserve their own hegemony, the stronger and richer nations must have a sense of moral responsibility for the other nations so that a real international system may be established which will rest upon the foundation of the equality of all peoples and on the necessary respect for their legitimate differences.
And Pope John Paul II orchestrated this 5 years ago.
And look what happened to Russia. Look what happened to Eastern Europe. Look at what has happened to the European economic community. Let me get a book, John.
Unbelievable. If people had any idea that this was orchestrated by the Pope and by his soldiers, the Jesuits, 5 years before it took place, and probably orchestrated long before that. This is just when it was published publicly.
When they pull all the cords together. Here's Malachi Martin's book once again, Keys of This Blood, where he discusses this. And we're wanting to come back to this later because he tells how, in his interview, how Gorbachev, and in the book, how Gorbachev has access to the inner circles of this European economic community, to the highest power circles, and is exerting enormous influence. So here I have a book, Euroquake, exceptionally informative and perceptive about recent events in Europe and the shape of the emerging world economy. And this book tells of the enormous power which is going to be generated by the European economic community. John, I'm reading from page 214 in Euroquake. Finally, there are fears in the world Jewish community which may linger the longest of all. Few Jews can look with complete dispassion on an expanding Germany. even if the causes and means of the expansion are completely different today from those of half a century ago. Hitler, the Nazis, and the Holocaust are inextricably identified with Germany. The passage of a mere 4 decades cannot erase those memories, especially when Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, is being sung again at rallies, Germany overall. And politicians all over Germany once more routinely invoke the idea of a glorious German fatherland. Schooled in the premise of never again, taught above all never to forget the victims of the Holocaust, even those Jews who identify little with organized Jewry know that if they wait to speak out until neo-Nazis or anti-Semites are in power again in Berlin, it will be too late. And we know that there has been a tremendous rash of anti-Semitic behavior in Germany, and Helmut Kohl is feeling so strong now, and Germany is flexing its muscles so powerfully that they do not feel that they have to be accountable to the rest of the world for some of their past.
And
they
on
can
the
just
evening news, we
do what they want to do.
The resurgence of the Nazi youth.
That's right.
These militant groups,
right.
gangs that are trying to revive Nazism.
Yes. John, back to the encyclical here on social concern by John Paul II. We want to look a little more at this. Solidarity is undoubtedly a Christian virtue. Beyond human and natural bonds, already so close and strong, there is discerned in the light of faith a new model of the unity of the human race, which must ultimately inspire our solidarity. So what John Paul II is wanting to create is a new model of unity in the human race. This supreme model of unity, which is a reflection of the intimate life of God, one God in 3 persons, is what we Christians mean by the word communion. This specifically Christian communion, jealously preserved, extended, and enriched with the Lord's help, is the soul of the church's vocation to be a sacrament in the sense already indicated. So in this view, the church is a sacrament. It is the means of salvation, you see, and the church is very central to the whole concept of solidarity, of the new model of globalism, of solidarity, a model of unity, and at the core of it is the church, the Roman Catholic Church. Page 79.
Okay.
Solidarity, therefore, must play its part in the realization of this divine plan, both on the level of individuals and on the level of national and international society. So it's a divine plan, it's a new model, it's solidarity, it's communion, it's church as sacrament at the core of it. The evil mechanisms and structures of sin, which we have spoken, can be overcome only through the exercise of human and Christian solidarity, to which the church calls us and which she tirelessly promotes. So there you have the ecumenical movement all tied in with this thing. Only in this way can such positive energies be fully released for the benefit of development and peace. Many of the church's canonized saints offer a wonderful witness of such solidarity. A few more quotes here. The church's social doctrine is not a third way between liberal capitalism and Marxist collectivism, nor even a possible alternative to other solutions less radically opposed to one another. Rather, it constitutes a category of its own. Well, if you've got communism, Marxist collectivism on one side, and liberal capitalism on the other, and then this is another category, it is a third way, it is a third category. Nor is it an ideology, but rather the accurate formulation of the results of a careful reflection on the complex realities of human existence in society and in the international order in the light of faith and of the church's tradition. Its main aim is to interpret these realities, determining their conformity with or divergence from the lines of the gospel teaching on man and his vocation, a vocation which is at once earthly and transcendent. Its aim is thus to guide Christian behavior. It therefore belongs to the field not of ideology, but of theology, and particularly of moral theology. The teaching and spreading of her social doctrine are part of the church's evangelizing mission, and since it is a doctrine aimed at guiding people's behavior, it consequently gives rise to a commitment to justice, according to each individual's role, vocation, and circumstances. Today, more than in the past, page 84, the Church's social doctrine must be open to an international outlook, in line with the Second Vatican Council, the most recent encyclicals, and particularly in line with the encyclical which we are commemorating. Here I would like to indicate one of them, the option or love of preference for the poor. And that's, like I mentioned before, that is a very common Jesuit term, the preferential option for the poor.
You think that applies to the great homeless drive that we have to take care of the homeless? Now, this looks so pious, Bob. I mean, who would be against helping the homeless?
I know.
I mean, nobody but a terrible, terrible, demonic person would not want to help the homeless. Yet, does that fit into this great Jesuit plan?
Well, as we mentioned I don't think we got fully into it, but in the Jesuit plan for the world church to be, one of the theses that was laid down by Karl Rahner and his colleague Heinrich Fries was that all the churches need to work together in these programs, interchanging and intermingling, and thus they develop this bond, this ecumenical bond, you see.
Bob, I cannot tell you how many people have written letters and sent church bulletins to where the local Seventh Adventist church and the local Seventh Adventist church pastor is working with the, quote, ministerial association, and they all have these organizations to where they're helping the poor and the needy and the homeless, and that sounds wonderful, but it's a Jesuit plan as a way to piously bring all the churches together. It's ecumenicalism.
Yes, and that book, Unity of the Churches, by Karl Rahner, the top Jesuit scholar of this century, rests upon the BEM document. Came out, remember, 1 year after the BEM document.
Right.
And the BEM document, in turn, rests upon the agenda of Vatican II. Page 86. It is necessary to state once more the characteristic principle of Christian social doctrine. The goods of this world are originally meant for all. Now notice how he spells this out. The right to private property is valid and necessary, but it does not nullify the value of this principle. Private property, in fact, is under a social mortgage, which means that it has an intrinsically social function based upon and justified precisely by the principle of the universal destination of goods. What does that sound like?
It sounds like that the Roman Catholic Church owns everything, and that they allow you to have your private rights until they conflict with their rights, and then their rights take precedence over your individual rights.
Social mortgage.
Exactly.
Your private property is under social mortgage. To be called in
and
when necessary.
Whenever we want to, we will.
To destine it for the poor, etc. So you see, this is a very interesting concept of socialism, isn't it? That private property is under a social mortgage. Rome knows that at the core of the liberties of this nation and the Western democracies is the concept of private property. Private property is considered to be one of the most fundamental rights of free people, to own private. And what did communism do?
Take away.
It took away.
Private.
Then the people are vulnerable.
Right.
And they're vulnerable to social engineering and change. And we want to look at that a little later. Page 87. In this respect, I wish to mention specifically the reform of the international trade system, which is mortgaged to protectionism and increasing bilateralism. The reform of the world's monetary and financial system. He's interested in reforming the world's monetary and financial system.
That is happening as we speak.
Today recognized as inadequate. In fact, George Hunt, have you seen any of his videos?
Yeah.
About the World Conservation Bank that is being planned by the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, and the financial elite of the world have merged their interests now with the environmental community to use the vast forests and wilderness areas of the third world peoples as a tool for the creation of one world monetary system.
It's coming.
Today recognized as inadequate, the question of technological exchanges and their proper use, The need for a review of the structure of the existing international organizations in the framework of an international juridical order. So get all of the international organizations settled into a framework of international law, an international juridical order. The international trade system today frequently discriminates, etc. The world monetary and financial system is marked by excessive fluctuation of exchange rates and interest rates. So he's going to try to solve that. Page 88, in the opinion of many, the international organizations seem to be at a stage of their existence when their operating methods, operating costs, and effectiveness need careful review and possible correction. Obviously, such a delicate process cannot be put into effect without the collaboration of all. There you've got that collectivism again.
Those that are not willing to collaborate must be exterminated.
This presupposes the overcoming of political rivalries and the renouncing of all desire to manipulate these organizations which exist solely for the common good. The existing institutions and organizations have worked well for the benefit of peoples. Nevertheless, humanity today is in a new and more difficult phase of its genuine development. It needs a greater degree of international ordering, greater order of the international community at the service of the societies, economies, and cultures of the whole world. None of what has been said can be achieved without the collaboration of all, especially the international community. This is page 90. In the framework of a solidarity which includes everyone, beginning with the most neglected. But the developing nations among themselves have the duty to practice solidarity among themselves and with the neediest countries of the world. It is desirable, for example, that nations of the same geographical area should establish forms of cooperation which will make them less dependent on more powerful producers. Interdependence is already a reality in many of these countries. And on he goes.
He's just prophesying what would take place in 1991, 1992. It's so obvious. And he did that 5 years ago.
Yes.
They've been planning it a lot longer than 5 years, though. It's just that that's when they've decided to make it public. I tell you, of all the popes that I have become acquainted with in my lifetime, none of them have the ability or been able to do what Pope John Paul II has done. It's phenomenal how the world has bowed at his feet, acknowledging him as the religious leader of the world.
That's right.
And when he writes something, boy, everybody listens. And to realize that he, quote, prophesied about all this years ago before it actually happened. Now we can see who was behind it all.
That's right. A little more about these 1,000 points of light. This is from a book by Tex Mars entitled Millennium, a chapter, The Order and Its Master Plan. Step by step and stage by stage, humanity is achieving oneness. Each day that passes brings some new insight or event which shows conclusively that the plan is working out. Today, the plan unfolds at an unprecedented rate, bringing all gradually to the envisioned goal. End quote. These were said by Benjamin Cream to be the words of the
Benjamin
master,
Cream.
New Age
leader,
guru,
sure.
the Lord Maitreya, claimed to be the coming Christ for the New Age. According to Cream, a fundamental change engulfs the world. And in this chapter, he discusses 1,000 points of light, which I thought would be interesting for you, John, since you're here at this community.
In Orlando, the very first one of these cities of 1,000 points of light. I'm very interested in that.
Possibly the best description, this is page 72 of the book, possibly the best description of the plan in terms of its call for a one-world government is found in a book generally unavailable to the public through bookstores but distributed widely among members of the order, entitled Solar Man. Authored by Thomas P. Ehrenzeller, this impassioned treatise predicts the coming of Solar Man, a sort of super being who will preside over a world of unparalleled prosperity and peace. Ehrenzeller carefully describes how the world is to be grouped together in regions, with the European community being the cornerstone of the world government. That's exactly what Malachi Martin says in Keys of This Blood. Ehrenzeller, who at the time of authoring Solar Man sat on the National Board of Directors of the World Federalist Association, had his book published under the auspices of a publishing house that use the name Apollo books and is supposedly headquartered in a small town in Minnesota. Apollo was the Greek sun god, great sun god of the Greeks, and since the order believes in the concept of 1,000 points of light, a network of light which emanates from the sun god, Lucifer, it is obvious why the name Apollo is used. In his revealing book, Aaron Zeller quotes Thomas Paine, who once announced, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again." What we need to begin anew, says Aaron Zeller, is a new world system. Sounds like the Pope, doesn't it?
Exactly. Sounds like our president.
If the leaders in power cannot see the new age coming, if they cannot help progress but rather impede it, then the peoples of the world will seek out new leaders. Dropping over on page 73, here again we see the belief of the order in a false god who assumes the name of the sun deity, but in actuality is none other than Lucifer. He is the pretender who masquerades as the light of this world, and the many members of the order networking around the world are the fabled 1,000 points of light, as Freemasonry loves to refer to them. How revealing, then, the statement made again and again by President George Bush, a high-level Mason and a member of other secret globalist societies, that his goal as chief executive is to encourage and promote 1,000 points of light across America. Page 74, as one devotee of the new world to come has written, quote, "By the year 2000, the White House will be turned into a lighthouse. Rays of light will emanate from Washington," end quote. This gentleman is only partly right. The rays may emanate from Washington, but it is not Washington that is their primary source. The primary source is Lucifer, whom occultists universally venerate as the father of light. No wonder the Apostle Paul warned that Satan often comes to us disguised as an angel of light and his demon spirits as ministers of righteousness. Then he has on page 75 the 6 goals of the order. The plan envisions the attainment of 6 specific goals by the order. These goals involve both spiritual and material objectives. Listed below are these 6 goals. Goal 1, the establishment of a new international economic order, identical to what we saw.
We know that's going to happen, in the process of happening.
Unified and under the direct command of the unelected elite on the highest level board of the order. Goal 2, the establishment of what will appear to be a democratic one-world government which will actually be controlled behind the scenes by the order. Goal 3, the conquest and subjugation by economic, financial, and spiritual means of the 2 superpowers, United States of America and Russia. Look what has already happened to Russia, also known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, now already diversified and changed. Goal 4, the ascension of the coming United States of Europe as the dominant nation in a confederated one-world government. Notice how this parallels with Malachi Martin.
It's prophetic.
And with John Paul II's plan.
Absolutely
all these
prophetic.
points. The ushering in of a supreme world leader to preside over this new unified one-world government.
And guess who that's going to be?
Ultimately,
John Paul too.
And ultimately
Lucifer,
Lucifer, according to Great Controversy.
Absolutely.
Goal 6, the establishment of a one-world religion which will coordinate all the world's religions, cults, faith groups, and spiritual beliefs under the guidance of a supreme pontiff, the spiritual equivalent of the supreme world
pontiff
leader. Now, I'd like to turn to an interview that just took place in April of this year with Malachi Martin. And this is from the Gospel Truth, a publication of Southwest Radio Church. I'll read a few paragraphs here. He's telling about Dr. Martin and discussing about Gorbachev here. Strangely enough, Gorbachev remains one of the most popular political figures of Europe. During a recent visit to Berlin, the crowds chanted, "Gorby, Gorby." Dr. Martin now believes, and other political observers concur, that Boris Yeltsin's days will be numbered, and Gorbachev will once more emerge as the man who can weld the European economic community and the remains of the Russian Empire together to form the structure for a mighty world conglomerate. Gorbachev is becoming an international political spokesman, but his writings indicate that he must realize, in order to make a comeback on a world scale, that he needs the prestige of the Pope and 1 billion Catholics. Now, it's interesting, John, that it has come out now that in some of the elections in Germany, as much as 90% of the vote that catapulted him into office was Catholic vote.
Roman Catholic.
And see, the Pope swung his support behind Hitler at the critical moment, and it catapulted him into power. And he knows he can do the same thing again. In an editorial dated March 9, 1992, by Gorbachev, Dateline Moscow, appearing in the Buffalo News, we quote, and here's Gorbachev writing, quote, "I have carried on an intensive correspondence with Pope John Paul II, and I think ours will be an ongoing dialogue. The sense of mutual affection and understanding which resulted from our meeting is to be found in each of our letters. I cannot help but say that we share a desire to move forward and complete what we began together. Personally, I would be glad to take any opportunity to continue working with the Pope, and I am certain that this desire is mutual and will prove lasting."
You see, it was essential that Gorbachev fade from the forefront for a while, so that when he comes back, he can come back with a roar.
As an international figure.
That's right, as an international figure, not as the president of the USSR.
Right. And with the backing of 1 billion Catholics. That's 1/6 of the world's population. It is very difficult to describe the relationship which took place, shaped between the Pope and myself, because the intuitive personal element is always of great importance in such relationships. Simply put, when I was with him, I realized that the Pope had also played a role in what we came to call the new political thinking.
Absolutely.
I am prepared to acknowledge that his speeches contained many ideas that were in harmony with ours. The closeness between us, of which I have just spoken, was not only personal but intellectual. What I have always held in high esteem about the Pope's thinking and ideas is their spiritual content, their striving to foster the development of a new world civilization. Now it can be said that everything which took place in Eastern Europe in recent years would have been impossible without the Pope's efforts. This is Gorbachev speaking.
I mean, he's admitting that the crumbling of the Soviet Union is attributed to the Pope.
You know, it's so interesting that Malachi Martin, in Keys of This Blood, sees the shifting of Russian thinking into what he calls Gramsciism. Did we discuss that in Jesuit Agenda 2?
I don't remember it, no.
Well, we'll look at it a little today. Gramsciism, which is a certain type of communist thinking that saw as its primary objective the neutralization of the potent Christianity that existed and the secularizing of Christianity to extend socialist concepts over the world, and how Roman Catholicism took this over from Gorbachev and Brezhnev, and it embraced it and imposed it on the Western world. The Jesuits were foremost in this work, so much so that in his book, The Jesuits, which I have here by Malachi Martin.
The thing that's so amazing is that this makes Revelation 13 come together for our Adventist people. Even if this a situation taking place in our church were not true, we could see prophecy being fulfilled just from the world leaders now encircling